Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Very excited to be joined once again by Steve Flink. Honored to have him on the podcast and be talking tennis. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm good, Faizan. Great to be with you again. I enjoyed our last discussion, and look, good timing for this one as we get to the end of the year.
Exactly. It is the end of the year. It's the off season, so that normally means it's pretty quiet and there's not really much going on. And then you get hit with a breaking news story that Iga Swiatek failed a drugs test, and that's been quite a big story. So before we get into the 2024 review in detail and look towards 2025, I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on that and your feelings towards the case and maybe some similarities between sinners potentially as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was shocked. I was as shocked to read about Iga as I was when the story broke just before the U.S. Open about Sinner, because I've always seen each of them as very straightforward, decent, honorable people. Then I would never have suspected either one. It tells me two things. The authorities are doing their job, which is they can't discriminate, nor can they exclude top players. I mean, there's got to be a fair process. What's confusing to me, what I don't like, is that the Swiatek case reminds me a bit of Sinner in the sense that suddenly we're finding out now, and there was a provisional suspension, and she played on, and then now she accepts the terms. And I don't say that skeptically of her. I'm just saying this is when we find out about it. And then the question I have, which wasn't raised in that initial report, is will WTA perhaps object to this one too? WTA stepped in on Sinner and said, no, we don't feel that's a sufficient punishment. And they believe it should be 1 to 2 years. So we're waiting for the Court of Arbitration now. And we should learn that in the next month, how that's resolved. The bottom line with me is I feel like in each of the similarity is it appears that neither one was deliberately trying to get away with anything. Then the question becomes, how much of a price do you pay for the people around you, or what you put into your system unintentionally? It's so complicated, and I feel like I don't feel like hers is out of line. You look at what happened to Sinner initially before WTA stepped in, and they basically were saying, we don't really think you did it intentionally. We're taking away your Indian Wells points. We're taking away your Indian Wells prize money. You're fine. You're good to go now. Be more careful next time. That seemed to be what they were saying. And then WTA said, not so fast. So I don't know what's going to happen with Igas. But again, neither case strikes me as a player trying to get away with something. And it appears that there were very trace amounts with her as well. So I hope it's resolved soon. I hope we don't get an appeal. WTA has every right to do it if they want. But my bottom line is not to belabor this whole discussion, because I know we have a lot of ground to cover on other topics. But I feel like the process takes too long. As Sinner found out, for instance, he found out about his suspension. He knew about it not long after Indian Wells. He was carrying that around with him for months, trying to get it resolved. Then they made the announcement right before the Open. That subjected him to criticism from players like Kyrgios and Denis Shapovalov, who I thought took kind of pot shots at him. And but at least then he moved to the Open, won the Open, seemed to be enjoying himself again, seemed to have moved past it. And then it was not that long after the Open we find out about the appeal. So I just feel like it's not fair, regardless of what the ultimate punishment is, that they have to live with it for so long. It wasn't fair to Simona Halep, who was very unhappy, I read today, about the decision regarding Iga. It wasn't fair to her that she got hit with 4 years and this took so long, and finally she did win her appeal. They reduced it to 6 months, something like that, but she'd already served a lot of time, or 9 months, whatever it was. They cut it way down and decided to give her the time that she'd already had to take off. But she felt like there was this was very unfair, the Iga case versus hers. I think they're all different. I don't know whether, I understand why Simona would feel that way. I don't know whether she's necessarily right, because each and every case is different, has to be evaluated on its own merits. But I hate to see in summation, I hate to see one player who was ranked number one, who's number two now in Iga, and the number one male player. It's not something we like to see happen in tennis. As I said at the outset, it's still, the positive is that the authorities are not letting anybody off. They're treating everybody, trying to treat everybody equally. and therefore not, are willing to suspend players of that stature. But I just wish they could. There could be the governing bodies, the ITIA and WADA and the Court of Appeal. I wish they could get this whole thing compressed in all of these cases so that everybody moves quickly. They have the information. They should be able to evaluate much faster, in my view, than they do. And meantime, the player has to, whether it was Halep, whether it's these two now, Iga and Sinner, they have to wait an awfully long time, and they have the burden of carrying that around with them every single day, not knowing what's next. I mean, I think Sinner has handled it remarkably well in the way that he immediately won the Open and the great fall that he's had, and winning the UN Championships and winning the Davis Cup. He seems to be able to compartmentalize very well. But he deserves to know long before he would get on a plane to go to Australia whether he's getting suspended for a year or two or whether he's done with it. And Iga, it appears, I'm guessing now there won't be an appeal, but I may be wrong. I mean, who's to say that WADA doesn't say again, that's too light a sentence.
Yeah, 100%. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the developments in Swiatek's case, as you said, because, I do wonder whether they will appeal. And then with regards to Sinner, they could come to a decision midway through the year, when he's got momentum or doesn't have momentum or whatever else it might be. And after what has been an amazing 2024 season, it could end up being a very strange 2025. And it's clearly a long delay, and it's been a long time coming, the ultimate verdict, I guess, for him in his case. And it's been amazing how he's managed to handle it mentally as well, whether, you're watching at home or you're a pundit or you're a player, and whether you think, they did or didn't do it on purpose. Let's just assume he didn't for the sake of it, because I think that's, everyone wants to see the best in people and assume that actually they didn't do it on purpose and they were very trace amounts. The fact that he managed to handle it the way that he's done, I think has been really, really impressive, as you mentioned. So, phenomenal season. And actually on his season, Steve, where does his season measure when comparing it to some of the other all-time great seasons? I mean, 2 slams, an ATP Finals win, Davis Cup, and that's only a few of the titles he won this year. I think he's the first player, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is correct, the first player to win the Australian Open, US Open, ATP Finals, and Davis Cup all in the same year. And
it was
a bit of a strange stat, but I mean, it's been a great year. 91% win percentage as well. I mean, where does it rank for you?
I mean, it's hard to say. I can't say I'm going to rank it up there with a Djokovic 2015 or Federer 05 or some of the. Well, granted, Roger in 05 won 2 of the 4 slams only. It's true, but we say Roger 06 maybe. But my point being, somehow I'm going to put more weight if somebody has an extra slam in there. And I feel, but it's certainly one of the best seasons. I'm just not going to rank it number 1, 2, or 3, let's say. But it's the level of consistency, never losing before the quarters. The fact that he won the 2 slams, that he's in the semis of the French and the quarters of Wimbledon. That he was far more solid than Carlos, and Carlos would be the first to admit that he deserved that ranking, despite the fact that they split the 4 majors. What's unfair, I think, is. And there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm not going to blame the ranking system, but Zverev is not the second best player in the world. Carlos is. That's another discussion. But as far as Sinner's year, it's still one of the great years. I mean, if he'd managed to pull off a 3rd slam, I just feel like I'm not going to quite put it up there with some of the Djokovic or Federer seasons. And maybe I'm not even going to put it up there with Rafa's 2010, where he won the last 3 majors of the year, taking Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and US Open in succession. But it's right behind those guys. It's right behind them. And frankly, I think Sinner's capable in the years ahead. Maybe he'll have an even better year somewhere coming up. I know you want to project later in the podcast. We'll talk about predictions for next year, but I think it was he should be very proud. And given what we were talking about in the beginning just now, all of this heartache and anguish over what's happening to him, And I'm sure deep down he believes he did nothing wrong. I'm sure he's disappointed in his trainer and his physio. But despite all that, the way that he carried on, now what we won't know is that the worst part of the year, when you look back on it, was actually French Open Wimbledon period. He let Carlos off the hook to a degree. I don't want to take anything away from Carlos. That was a fantastic match, the semis at Roland Garros, but Sinner's up 6-2, 2-love. I'm not saying he should be therefore beat Carlos 2-3 and 2, but the second set got away. He wins the third, and then he's serving at 4-5 in the fourth with a 40-15, and that game kind of got away from him. I thought at the very least he could have gotten to a 4-set tiebreak. He was holding really easily up until then, and maybe he finishes Carlos off, and maybe then he goes on and beats Zverev for the title. And then the 5-set loss to Medvedev, the only time he lost to Medvedev all year long, was that Wimbledon quarter. So that was maybe the only disappointing stretch of the year for him, the way I look at it. But otherwise, almost unblemished.
Yeah, 100%. He was so
I want to add, the only thing why I would rate it a cut below some of the other guys in their years is he did go 0-3 with Carlos. You know, that's your biggest rival, and you lose to him in the finals of Indian Wells, where you won the first set 6-1, the semis of the French, which I just mentioned, and then that incredible match in China, where he was up 3-love in the third set tiebreak, serving at 3-love. And they both had a lot of chances before them. It was one of the best matches of the year. But again, he still didn't beat him. Lost 7 straight points. Carlos went on a rampage. It was just spectacular shot making that took it away from Sinner. But that's a blemish when you lose to a key rival 3 times and you have nothing to compensate for. So again, that takes it down just a small notch. It doesn't. But I think he's going to be very conscious of that next year. He doesn't want to have another losing record against Carlos. At the very least, he wants to hold his own and hopefully have the upper hand. That's going to be one of the more interesting aspects of 2025, is to see how the Alcaraz-Sinner rivalry unfolds, because they've already given us 10 wonderful matches so far, and I think we have another 50 to look forward to in the years ahead.
Wow, yeah. Well, looking forward to those. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the rivalry, right? Because Djokovic in his phenomenal years, and there's been quite a few of them, but he's dominated those head-to-heads with Federer and Nadal as well, 2011, 2015 especially. And so it's interesting that Sinner's managed to do it.
Exactly. 6-0 against Rafa, 4-1 against Roger. That's pretty amazing work. And that's what you want. That's what you want as a champion, to beat your biggest and best rivals when it matters the most. And Sinner, to his great credit, commented after the loss in China and said that he thinks about Carlos all the time. Not in a vengeful way, just about what do I have to do to beat this guy? Not negatively. Sounded very positive, kind of like, okay, I know I have to do something special against him. What is it? He'll figure it out, because I think he's too good. As I say, I don't expect that Carlos to go away, and Carlos is a magnificent talent. I just think that Sinner owes it to himself to be right in there with him, at least trading victories and getting his share of victories. So we'll see.
Yeah, 100%. Well, at least Sinner, and it doesn't count the head-to-head, but at least he beat Carlos in the 6 King Slam and got $6 million. So at least his bank account looks healthy. His head-to-head might not. But
yeah, it's small compensation. I agree with you. That was also felt good because they're trying. There's that much money on the line, so at least knew he won it fair and square. But right, it doesn't go in the record books, and he knows that. But look, I think he's a complete professional, and I think he's not someone who's going to shirk the responsibility here. He's going to regard the Carlos rivalry as one of the things that he cherishes the most. And that's the way he seems to be talking about it. Like, okay, I know how good he is, but I also know how good I am, and that's why we have so much to look forward to. Is they will keep pushing each other to the hill. Just find it fascinating, because I think of Carlos as the one where the level. Like, I'll put my hand up here. Carlos can be way up here at the top of my screen, or he can be down here. Sinner is always somewhere in between and very close to Carlos. Close, maybe not quite at Carlos's peak level, but close enough. And yet he lost all 3 matches. That, you go figure. That's tennis.
Yes, I 100% agree with you when it comes to the levels with Sinner and Alcaraz. I actually said exactly the same thing in one of my recent podcasts, saying that Alcaraz's peak level for me is the highest of the current tour. Sinner's just below that, but Sinner's base level is quite a lot higher than Alcaraz's. So I think there was an interesting little segment that the ATP did with Carlos and Yannick, and Carlos said one of the best things about Sinner is that he always plays at a 9 or 10 out of 10 every match. And I think he was being a little bit generous. So we could say maybe an 8 or 9 out of 10, let's say, for example, in every match. And out for Carlos, he can sometimes, I think it's fair to say, he can dip to 6 out of 10 or even a 5 at times when he's really not feeling it. So, but he's capable of hitting those 10s, right? So I think that's the biggest difference. And that's why, like you were saying with the ranking, that's why Sinner's number one, because despite splitting the slams, when it comes to consistency throughout the year, Carlos hasn't had that same consistency. And I do wonder whether it's just a case of maturity. Yannick's slightly older. Carlos has had some really tight losses, the Olympics. I know he didn't affect him, but I don't think it's a coincidence that Cincinnati in 2023 went on a run where he wasn't looking so good. And then obviously he played well at Indian Wells this year and then picked up form again. Similarly, it looks like the same things happened after that Olympic loss to Novak, a very tight match as well. But I don't know what you think on that as well, in terms of the fluctuations we see.
Yeah, no, it's a good analysis you're making. I feel like Carlos sometimes gets caught off guard by big hitters, Mahach, those types. Humbert, guys can come at him fiercely, and he's not quite ready for it, and that throws him a bit. And also, it's just the adventuresome artist in him that always wants to show off of the crowds. And I don't mean that in a mean-spirited way at all. He's a great kid, and he's not. It's not an ego trip. It's just that he loves pleasing the crowds, and he loves pleasing himself in that sense of saying, isn't it fun to be able to play tennis like this? And you see the smile come on his face when he's hit an improbable winner and looking to the crowd. And Sinner isn't that way at all. Sinner is much more basic and fundamental, and I'll do whatever I have to win the point, and you got to prove to me that you're better. And if he has an opening for a winner, he'll hit it, but he doesn't care if he forces the error out of you. He doesn't care if you give it to him. He's just totally professional. But this is all going to balance out. I'll just say a quick thing about Carlos. I will say this: the loss to Djokovic in the Olympics, he looked angry with himself, but Djokovic played a magnificent match. And that's two tiebreakers. Neither one breaks serve on the clay. Djokovic plays two splendid tiebreakers. I think he just beat Carlos that day. And I thought Carlos was kind of hard on himself looking at his reactions as it was unfolding. But that to me was maybe the best I've ever seen Carlos play in defeat. That's how I looked at that match. That was to me one of the highlights of the year, along with the Sinner Alcaraz match that we were just discussing. It was that Olympic final. And obviously, you can easily understand why Carlos would be so dismayed to lose, in the sense that he wanted it as much as Novak did too. And you're playing for your country, and it's the Olympics, and only comes every 4 years. But I just felt like Novak took that away from him, that Carlos did not hand it to him, that it was a very high caliber contest.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. I think maybe it was also the fact that he beat Novak so convincingly at Wimbledon before. Yeah. So he probably went into it thinking, yes, I should win this. I'm not the underdog. I should be winning it, and probably put that pressure on himself as well. But it was a phenomenal match. You said it was one of your favorite matches. Was that your favorite match all year on the ATP side?
Yeah, yes, I'm torn. Well, I'm really torn between, and on the tour, definitely the Beijing Carlos and Sinner. But throwing the Olympics in, I'm very conflicted about which match I enjoyed more. They both were spectacular, and it's interesting because Sinner himself, I remember reading his comments at the time. He was preparing for his next tournament. He was getting ready, I guess, in Canada, and he watched the final, and he talked about how much he enjoyed watching Carlos and Novak play that Olympic final. So those were the highlights of the year for me, but by far, I would say. We had a really good Sinner Medvedev Australian final, the comeback from 2 sets down. Carlos with his back-to-back 5-setters, because not only did he do that against Sinner, but he's 2 sets to 1 down again against Zverev, and he wins the final. They're a very good match. very good performance from Carlos at Wimbledon against Novak, who I thought was a little subpar, but still superb first 2 sets from Carlos. And then the Open, pretty straightforward, Sinner over Fritz in the final. But again, even along the way at those tournaments, I don't think we got a lot of good matches on Australia, like the Medvedev Zverev semi from 2 sets down for Daniel. There were a lot of really good matches there, but overall, maybe not as many spellbinding matches at the majors as we usually get. So that's why I picked those other 2, China and Roland Garros for the Olympics, as my favorites.
Yeah, they were phenomenal matches to watch. I think the level as well was so good in both. I think it's fair to say probably the best level throughout the year, I think, in those 2 matches, for sure, in my opinion. On Novak's season, because you're talking about the Olympic gold, and that was his main goal going into 2024. He said it before the season started, said, look, the slams are great, but I guess he's won 24 of them. So his biggest priority was to win the Olympic gold, add it to his collection. How do you see his season, Steve? Is it job done? Olympic gold medal, didn't win any slams, but then he can go into 2025 and focus on that now. But no real cause for concern. I guess he had the knee issue as well. We both saw him at Wimbledon. He wasn't 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would tell you that it was worth it just to get the Olympics. Now, it's interesting because I heard early in the year that there was a discussion between Ivanisevic and Novak about his plans for the year, and he was saying something to the effect to Goran of, I may skip Wimbledon and put my full force into winning the Olympics, and how Ivanisevic was apparently saying to him, you can't do that. That's what I heard. And I wouldn't doubt it because it was so important to him. But obviously then the calmer, more rational side comes back and you realize you can't skip Wimbledon. You only have so many opportunities. And it worked out beautifully for him because he's still in the finals of Wimbledon. Look, he's such a great big match player. He can't have been thrilled with what happened at Wimbledon because he had already lost a heartbreaker to Carlos the year before. He's won the title 7 times. He's trying to tie Roger's record, get to 8. And he loves that place, Novak. He's come to love that maybe more than any of the slams. I'm not sure he doesn't even love it more than Australia, despite the 10 wins in Australia. We could argue that point, but disappointing again because after the Olympics, he couldn't. I remember I had the feeling then that maybe that was going to ignite him, that he was going to be so excited and relieved to win in Paris and get that gold that he'd still have time to sort of work his way into form in New York and maybe take the title. And of course, the Popyrin match was really way subpar for him, taking nothing away from Popyrin, but that's not a guy that he should lose to over a best of 5. And I thought that Novak was maybe at 70%, maybe, not anywhere near his best. So that was disappointing. And then, he came back in the fall and did play pretty well in Shanghai. A nice match with Fritz and a much better performance against Sinner than he'd had against Sinner in Australia. A very competitive match. And then, of course, he kind of cut it short. He also went to Saudi Arabia, and then he decided no Paris, Bercy, no Turin. So it wasn't his kind of year overall. But I think for him, it wasn't a confidence shattering because of what happened at the Olympics and because that was always the biggest goal. And all of the kind of subpar performances before he hurt his knee at Roland Garros, which, by the way, was a very bad break. Who's to say he wouldn't have won Roland Garros? I mean, a couple of 5-setters, he's in the quarters, he's excited, and then he's out of the tournament with the knee injury. So that was very bad luck. And what happened before then, I don't think meant that much. Australia was understandable that he'd finally lose. And then, Indian Wells was a terrible loss, but he just, I don't think he really felt like playing through that stretch, but I think he did. As he closed in on Paris, I think he was very excited about playing again and trying to pull off some more slams. So disappointing in a sense, but had he not won the Olympics, I think he would have been very disappointed, but that changed everything. And that still was, that's something he'll be thinking about as he looks back on the year. He'll cherish that moment. And obviously now that he's got Andy Murray in his corner, he's making it clear how serious he is about getting a 25th major and still going after these big prizes. I mean, that that was his way of telling everybody, if you think that I think that I'm done, you're wrong. I've got more I want to accomplish here, and I can still compete with anybody. That was the other thing he was saying by hiring Murray was, yes, Sinner and Alcaraz are great, great players, but I can compete with them. Even if I am approaching the age of 38, I can still have my days against them, and I relish the chance to prove it.
Yeah, agreed. It's such an exciting partnership, and very interesting to see Murray take on his first coaching role after retiring with Novak, because it's such a big job, and he's got big boots to fill with Goran leaving, of course, and he was so prolific with Novak. But they obviously respect each other a lot. I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't know what you think, Steve, but it's going to be very interesting to see the dynamic between the two on court. So Murray's very used to being the one on court and wearing his heart on his sleeve and being the very vocal one, but we know Novak's like that on court as well. So when Novak inevitably, shouts to the box and they pan to Murray, it's going to be interesting to see how Murray does actually handle that. Is it going to be far and far? Is he going to be cool and calm? And we're going to see a different side to him, like he's, I guess, off court, very cool, calm, and collected. And how will that relationship work? So it's going to be very interesting to see. Obviously, they are quite friendly. They grew up together, playing in the juniors, ITFs, and know each other really well. And Murray, I think it's fair to say, has got one of the best tennis IQs, in my opinion, anyway, in history. What do you think he brings? Because from my knowledge, he's very much an advocate of data and statistics as well. And I know they're introducing live data to the on-court coaching in 2025, so they'll be able to provide players with live data, if I'm not mistaken, in the Australian Open. So I imagine he'll be utilising that as well, and that's a big plus. But what do you think he brings to the team for Novak, and potentially any shortcomings he might bring as well, given it's his first coaching job?
Yeah, I don't think there are many shortcomings. I mean, I know it caught people by surprise, and everybody was a bit shocked. But you think back on it, okay, they're born 1 week apart in 1987. They always had great respect for each other. They couldn't be close chums competing like that. Just like that's the way it played out with very, Rafa and Novak, same thing. They might have been a bit closer when they were young, and then you have to sort of keep your distance. But the respect between Djokovic and Murray was always very clear. So here Murray comes in. Nobody knows Novak's game better than Andy. Andy also knows exactly how Sinner and Alcaraz and Zverev and all the others play, and he probably will have some new, fresh ideas. And he probably is pouring. I wouldn't doubt that he's pouring over matches right now on YouTube. And even though he saw a lot of them at the time, just trying to come up with ideas, he is probably more. He probably likes the analytics a bit more than, say, Goran did. Goran was not wild about that stuff, and that's fine. I think Goran's formula worked. So I don't mean that as a criticism of Goran, but Andy may be more open to it. Novak to a degree. As far as the interaction, I think they'll work that out. I'm sure they're going to talk that through. Andy knows that Novak is kind of like him in the sense of venting. They're very similar in that regard, is that Andy would vent to his corner, and that's how Novak is. And sometimes Ivanisevic looked a bit flustered at times because he didn't feel like he had time to answer. He was there and his mouth's open, but what can you say in that 20 seconds? So, but I believe that Andy and Novak will talk that through. And I think you are correct, very correct about the tennis IQ. He has one of the great tennis minds, Murray, which has been obscured by the annex. People, have been maybe more focused watching him play on him exploding or getting mad and all that stuff. But underneath it all, we all knew the tactical acuity and the incredible court sense that he had. And Novak has it too. But I also think Andy will be smart enough not to try to have Novak do things that maybe he would have wanted to do. He'll cater it to what's best for Novak. And I think Djokovic knows that. And I feel like it'll be inspiring for him to have Murray in his corner as somebody, the guy's played 4 Australian finals. I mean, Novak beat him in all those Australian finals, beat him in a French final, and lost to him in a U.S. and a Wimbledon final. So I guess 5-2 overall in finals. And that's a lot of big, big matches, a whole slew of semis at the majors. they played that match at the end of 16, and Andy beat Novak to clinch the #1 ranking for the year at the year-end championships. So many monumental meetings. And I feel like Novak will be really happy to have someone that understands him so well, and his psyche and his game. So I don't see the negatives. I mean, I think they have to just work out the parameters. I mean, for instance, when Murray worked with Lendl is much older, and I think Andy understood he could not do that stuff with Ivan that he was with other coaches. The way he started off going back to the days of Brad Gilbert, he simply couldn't do it. And he was very respectful of Ivan, and he spared him that stuff. Well, I'm not sure Novak, that Andy will have a problem if in a tense moment in a third set it's 1 set all, 4 all in the third against somebody playing Novak in the 4th round in Australia, that Novak starts venting. I think, and my guess is he could handle that because he completely understands it, and would try to come back with some quick, agile advice, and they go from there. But they'll be able to talk very frankly to each other. I think it's going to work really well. I mean, it doesn't guarantee success, but I just think the motivation is there for Djokovic. It'll be nice to have to start it off in Australia, where Novak has had all that success, and to see what they can do from there. Obviously, the commitment seems to be right now only through Australia, but I'd be surprised if it doesn't last longer than that, even if Djokovic does not win the Australian Open. If they feel like they're on the right path, I see them continuing through the year.
Yeah, agreed. I'm really looking forward to it. So I hope they do continue past the Australian Open, but the Australian Open is going to be intriguing to say the least. So let's see how it pans out. One last question I had for you specifically on the men's actually was on Daniel Medvedev, because he has had a very interesting year. If you look at his statistics for the year, it hasn't been a terrible year, but I think it's fair to say that towards the back end of this year, he's clearly grown quite frustrated with his form, with the conditions, with the balls, with the pace of court. I think he's also getting frustrated with the fact that certain opponents he's struggling to get past, like Carlos and Yannick. And you mentioned, of course, only the one win over Yannick when, I don't want to say he didn't deserve it, but obviously Yannick was ill during that. We saw him, kind of was throwing up on court as well. And against Carlos, he struggles and has struggled against him for a couple of years now as well. It seems like he's almost a little bit stuck in his career in knowing how to capture that second slam. Well, what do you think he needs to do, Steve, in the off-season to really challenge those guys? And maybe not specifically those guys, but actually start winning titles again, because he hasn't won a title since Rome last year. And yeah. I think one of the things you could say about him was that he always used to be a prolific title winner for the last few years, but that hasn't been the case in recent times.
No, that's one of the longest dry spells for a top player that I've ever seen. It's a very long time. You're not even at the midway point of 2023, and you don't win anymore. Now, at least following that Rome win, he had that really good U.S. Open, beating Carlos and losing to Novak in the final, and then pretty solid through the rest of the year, and then starts this year with that final against Sinner in Australia. But I feel like since then, even though we saw him, play okay on the hard courts in the spring and okay over the summer, no, he hasn't been the same guy. And everybody talks a lot about his shoulder. I don't know all the details there, just how serious the shoulder injury. All I know is that the serve is not coming through for him nearly as efficiently and effectively as it once did. And I think people don't realize that as much as we admire the backboard in Medvedev and how willing he is to grind guys down and to take that return of serve from back near the fence and then start engaging you in these mammoth rallies, that he still needs those free points. And I don't think he's getting as many off that first serve, and I think that's worrying him too. And I think you sized it up well. There's a wider cast of players now that on the given day, they think they can beat him on a given day. So it isn't just the dilemma of Carlos and Yannick. It's a lot of other guys in the top 10, top 20 that won't beat him every time out, but will threaten him a lot and will beat him at least on occasion. And he knows that. I think he would accept that analysis. So therefore, the word stuck that you use is a very good one. He is a bit stuck right now. And here's a guy that's won a major, and he's lost 5 finals at the slams. And now it's getting harder and harder for him to get back to the finals. I didn't think he gave a terribly good effort against Sinner at the U.S. Open in the quarters. They split sets, and then it kind of got away from him. And my concern about him is also emotional, in that he said before the year started he was going to try to, his goal was he wanted to sort of calm himself down a bit. The gist of what he was saying was he didn't want to have these explosions. He kind of knew that was sapping his own energy. It wasn't doing him any good. But he always reverts to it. It just keeps coming back. It just as soon as you think maybe it's gone, he implodes against somebody else. And I can understand the frustration, because when we look at what he was doing there in that period from 19, well, you could even say 19 through 23, if you looked at it in its entirety. But what happened this year was discouraging. And in the end, Fritz passed him and ends the year at 4. It's not that big a deal to be 5 in the world, but the question I have is, can he really gain any ground? I suppose he could move up to 4 next year. To me, that's about the best case scenario. But there's a chance he slips a few more places if he doesn't find some kind of a formula now soon. And you said, what can he do? The what can he do part is he could try to play more like he did the first 2 sets against Sinner at the Australian Open final, where he's ultra aggressive. Because I thought he was incredibly consistent, considering how much more he was going for in that match, and still hardly missing. But the extra aggression was shortening some of the points and allowing him to force errors and create openings for winners that he normally wouldn't have. But I don't know if he can do that. He tried to do a little bit of that at the year-end championships. It didn't work when he played Yannick there. I just felt like it was fleeting success with a more aggressive style. And I worry about him in the sense that I don't know if there's a way out of this. I mean, he certainly can have he can have a bunch more years where he might finish anywhere between 6 and 10 in the world and do good things. But is he ever going to get that second major? And how many more finals is he going to get to? Because Sinner and Alcaraz are going to beat him almost every time, in my view, almost every time. And then the danger is the others. And then Novak is still not gone. So the picture is not very bright. And I never thought I'd be saying these kinds of things about him based on what I observed from 19 through 23. But I think a lot has changed. And he's in a dilemma.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how his 2025 pans out. But I think he almost sums up quite well himself as well in the post-match press conferences when he loses to Sinner and Alcaraz. And he almost is quite frank with the media and himself that he knows that their level is above his. And he's clearly trying to figure out how to bridge the gap. And that tends to be trying different tactics, and it just hasn't quite clicked and worked for him. So, he's not the most comfortable at the net. So he does come to the net and it looks a bit awkward, but sometimes it's effective, but it's not his most natural game. Tries to be ultra aggressive, as he said, but again, it's just not really his game style. And he tends to revert to type when he's really up against it, I guess, as most players would do. So I'm interested to see how it pans out. Given that courts from the court index have gotten quicker this year, you would think it would help his case, but it seems to have gone the opposite way, which is interesting as well, from my point of view. But I guess we'll see. On the women's side, Steve, I mean, a fantastic season for Sabalenka, winning 2 out of the 4 slams, and she is, I guess, like Sinner. She's a hard court queen, and he's a hard court king, and she's really, I think, consolidated herself now as the best player on the women's tour, number 1 ranking as well at the end of the year. How good was her season, and do you see her kind of continuing this type of dominant form going forward? And do you think she can start to translate onto other surfaces as well?
Oh, I think, listen, we've seen her play some great tennis on clay too. And, that Madrid match, this year, great final in Spain against Iga that she was unlucky to lose. And she's very, very good on clay. She's tremendous on hard and grass. I feel like she can. I'm kind of not sure how it's going to play out. In other words, I think that we have Coco ended the year strong. I'm encouraged about where she's headed. Coco seems to be and beat Sabalenka at the end of the year. Has it's a good matchup for her. She might have even beaten her in Australia this year if she would have held serve at 6-5, 30 love first set semifinal. Who knows? So that's an intriguing matchup. Then you have the question of whether Iga, who is always going to be at her best on clay and always the favorite at the French, whether she can finally start winning these majors elsewhere, because she still only has got that one U.S. Open and hasn't done well at Wimbledon or Australia. But I feel like she and Sabalenka, that rivalry could be magnificent if Iga kind of comes back and with a new voice coaching her, she's in a position to maybe try to reinvent herself again. And what I'm hoping and I'm kind of expecting is that those two will have perhaps a neck and neck race next year, assuming that Iga does really well on the clay again, that there'll be a close race with those two, that Coco will be in the mix, and we'll see what happens with Rybakina, who's going to work with Ivanisevic, which is an intriguing partnership. And I think Rybakina is a great player, and I think she just has to be reminded of it. She's been a bit of a head case. Quiet. She's not an explosive personality, but she's gone through a lot of withdrawals from tournaments, and obviously she's had her struggles, whatever it's about, and it's her business. But she's struggled to sort of find her place in the game, and some things went wrong this year that we don't know about, and nor do we need to know about. But I'm confident that by hiring Ivanisevic, she's now trying to sort of start anew next year, and I think she can get back in the mix and could be a great year. Still, to get back to your original point, Sabalenka, I would still guess that at the end, if we sat down and had this podcast at this time next year, we're going to be talking 2 more majors for Sabalenka. That's my guess. Minimum 1, but I expect 2.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, she's really turned a leaf, I think, on the mental side as well, more than just the physical and her consistency in her game. I just feel like she's a lot more rock solid mentally, and we've seen her cut out the double faults. I know that she's worked on her biomechanics, etc. as well, but I think a lot of that is also mental. So that's been a real positive. I think this year we've seen her coming back, and also she's digested losses really well. I think in the past, when she had really bad losses, she potentially then unravel in future tournaments. That hasn't quite happened as well. That's been really impressive. And the point of Rybakina is intriguing because she is a nightmare for Swiatek and Sabalenka on paper. If you look at the head, she's got winning head against Swiatek, and Sabalenka, of course, doesn't like playing her as well. Rybakina came back after the long layoff and then played the WTA finals, beat Sabalenka in the round robin, and you're just thinking, oh wow, okay, what's going on here? So she didn't obviously manage to get through the round robin, but I think it just shows the qualities that she possesses. So I'm really excited actually about the partnership with Ivanisevic, and he did so well with Novak. If he's able to tap into her potential, she's able to stay fit, she should be up there. And Coco had a fantastic end to the year. And I think it's fair to say that the women's tour is going to be extremely competitive again next year. And we have so many different players who are going to be competing for big titles. And we haven't even talked about the likes of, say, Jasmine Paolini, who's had a really amazing breakthrough season as well.
Or Jess Pegula as well. I mean, look, she didn't have after the Open, we didn't see much from her. It was not a great ending of the year and got hurt at the end of the year. But that was a nice breakthrough for her to get to the finals of the U.S. Open and beat Makova and that great semi, and a very good 5-5 final with Sabalenka. Very impressive. A little unlucky not to win a set, up 5-3 in the second set. But I think she's a great player too. Whether I would bet against her winning a major. I'll admit that. But I also think, next year, I'm not going to rule it out for career. Don't expect her to win one in 2012, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if Pegula was back in another one of the finals, somewhere along the line, whether it's Australia or Wimbledon or again at the U.S. Open, because I think she's a great competitor and moves so well, and she's just such a good all-around ball striker. I like the way she plays. She just doesn't have quite the artillery in her arsenal that some of the others do, even though she hits the ball bigger than given credit for. it's not going to be Sabalenka-like. She doesn't have a serve like Rybakina, although she's improved her serve. I'd say Coco has a better first serve than Jess. So, but she'll be in the mix as well, no doubt about it. And you know, and the Italian girl she's just you got to marvel at her to get to the back-to-back slam finals. And she also has more aggression in her game than many people talk about. It's the speed, but she can hit with a lot of pace as well when she needs to. I really like the way she's adapted. She seems to me, I mean, I think the French Wimbledon back-to-back is proof of it. She can play and adapt, and she's good on anything. So she will also be in the mixes. So we've got this group of 6 or 7 players that are all going to be vying for these crowns and all going to be pushing each other to the hilt. So I expect a very good 2025. As I say, I'm giving Sabalenka 2. I guess I'll give Iga the French with some reluctance, but I'm giving it to her. And then somebody else. I'm not going to tell you, I can't say which one, but a Rybakina or a Coco, one of them is going to grab the remaining major.
Okay, well, as you're talking about that, Steve, so you've gone for Iga for the French. So for Sabalenka, which 2 would you pick for her?
I guess I would. In the end, I suppose I'd stick with the usual formula of the Australia-US. You know, are still going to be her best, and then Wimbledon, I think, is going to be is really going to be open. It's obviously Sabalenka. No reason she couldn't win that one too, but I feel like somebody else might have, and that might be where, with good work from Gorin and the fact that she's won it there before, that Rybakina gets a second crown. You know, it's still her best surface, I think, and you know that's where she can most take advantage of her serve, which to me is when she's right, it's the best first-second serve combination in women's tennis. So, and I think that Gorin is going to try to exploit that to the hilt, take her even to another level. He really did great work with both Cilic back in 2014 when Marin won the U.S. Open, beating Federer in the semis and Kei Nishikori in the final. You know, Gorin worked with Marin on his toss, and he lowered his toss. He really helped him to improve his serve. And I suspect, as great a server as Rybakina is, that Gorin will have some technical ideas on what he could do with her. And if that's the case, you know, maybe she's the one that wins Wimbledon.
Yeah, agreed. And interesting to see where Krejcikova lands as well in that kind of band of 6 or 7.
Yeah.
One Wimbledon didn't really manage to do much else in the year, but
yeah, she's a great player. Yeah. And Mahova, you know, she was so close to being in the U.S. Open final. I mean, she played so well. Jess had to really make a spectacular comeback to beat her, and that would have been an intriguing final if that had come about. To see, you know, that could have been very hard fought in the finals as well. Sabalenka would have had no easy time. So there's no doubt that top 10 is exceedingly strong right now.
Yeah, 100%. And you're talking about Pegula maybe not having quite the artillery as some of the other players, but someone who does have the artillery and in their arsenal is Naomi Osaka, of course, and she had a comeback year. I mean, Steve, how do you think her year went, given that she has just come back after?
Well,
after
I think it was disappointing. She was so commendable in the sense that I felt like her attitude was great. She's sometimes been her own worst enemy in the past. I get it. She's expected a lot of herself. She's gotten down on herself before she took the break and had the baby. But I thought she really did a very nice job of staying positive no matter how many hard defeats she took. To me, what really hurt her tremendously, and a lot of people thought at the time it was going to help, was coming so close against Iga at the French. Match point, you know, serving for the match, you know, a chance to go up 5-1 in the third. She was just so close to putting that match away, even decisively in 3. And she couldn't close her out. And all credit to Iga for her composure and competitiveness. But I think that Naomi, the way she was playing in the second and third, should have won. And that would have made a world of difference to me in the rest of her year in terms of closing out tight matches and beating tough opposition. Good match against Ostapenko at the U.S. Open, but then unable to make anything of it. And so, yeah, I thought it was disappointing. I say that with the caveat that I loved her attitude. It seemed to me that she was willing to accept that this could happen, but she wasn't giving up. There wasn't a lot of negativity. She's not that far from where she was, but this year will be crucial because I thought it was going to turn around at a certain point, and it could have been Paris, but where she would start to win a couple of close three-setters and then take off and start really, that we'd see her in the latter stages of a major, and that didn't happen. So I hope it does next year. I'm not ruling that out, but with that group of players that we discussed, it's going to be a big challenge for Naomi. That's a lot of players for her to deal with too, and she's capable of beating any of them. But it's just that they're so well established and so confident and so good that it's going to take Naomi at the old Naomi and maybe 5% more to get her where she needs to be. So I feel like 2025 becomes extremely important because she could accept that this year was going to be a transition year, but she's not going to easily accept next year if her 2025 results virtually replicate 2024, she'll be, I think, pretty discouraged.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's one of those what-if moments if she beats Swiatek in that Roland Garros second round. How does Swiatek's season go? How does Osaka's season go? I mean, who knows? Maybe there wouldn't be much difference. I don't know. Who knows? But it's one of those interesting, alternate realities that everyone would like to have a peek at. And I mean, the roster is just stacked on the WTA side, and we haven't even mentioned Zheng Xinwen. Ivanisevic always had a really good year as well, and there's the young upstarts coming through in Mira Andreeva and Emma Raducanu looks like she's playing a bit better. Leila Fernandez, all these players. I feel like the women's tour is always booming with talent. Paula Badosa has been playing better as well this year. I think.
Yeah, Badosa made a lot of progress. She did. She was great to watch again. Terrific to watch.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned your favorite match on the ATP side that you watched this year. Do you have a favorite on the WTA side on the women's tour that you really enjoyed?
I think it was the one I mentioned, in Spain. The Swiatek Sabalenka was such a beauty, right down to the wire there, tight, a great win for Iga on the eve of the French. Sabalenka couldn't have played any better in match points. It was so close, and would have been a tremendous win for Sabalenka. But I thought the standard in that one was extremely high. And then I also loved the WTA finals, Coco's win in the finals there against Zheng. I mean, it was really a beautifully played match from start to finish. And the level was extremely high there from both. And I thought Coco had to pull out all the stops to win that match and win that title, and did so. But she was pushed to the hilt. So we're seeing that the Chinese girl, she's really, it was no fluke, the finals of the Australian, not at all. And then apparently got confused about her schedule. There was all that talk about, she didn't know where she's supposed to be playing with, but she put all that behind her and then had a great conclusion there at the WTA finals and gets to the finals there and comes so close against Coco. So I feel like she is also, she's another of those people in the top 10 that, can push anybody and can beat anybody. It's an exciting time. And I feel like she has got a lot of game and a lot of gumption, and she wasn't happy to lose that. She wasn't sort of saying, well, I did a great job, I got to the final. She has a little bit of a chip on her shoulder in the best possible sense, kind of like, no, that's not good enough for me. That's not what I expect. I can win these tournaments. So that's going to be her resolve coming up. Instead of being in the finals of the Australian and the finals of the WTA finals, she's going to be expecting and hoping to win those next year. No easy task, but again, right in the mix with all the other players we mentioned. So it's an incredibly wide and diverse cast of players and playing styles.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, she beat Swiatek at Roland Garros for the Olympics, and then obviously went on to win the gold there. So I'm sure she'll take some confidence from that going forward.
Oh, that was great work. Great work.
Yeah, 100%. Fantastic from her. In terms of players on the women's and men's tour, did you have a specific player in mind who you thought was the most improved player for you during the season?
No, I mean, I no one. Paolini would be a good candidate for the women, given that who among us would have said she's going to be in back-to-back Grand Slam finals? So I'd put her up there. Among the men, no, you could argue that it was Fritz, oddly, and even though I don't expect that Taylor will be able to climb any higher, the fact that he got to number 4, I mean, and that we suddenly saw him after all of this slew of Grand Slam quarterfinals. And I was especially discouraged for him, and taking nothing away from Musetti, who's a great player and had a terrific year. But I don't think Taylor Fritz should lose to Musetti on grass courts. And I don't care what anybody wants to say about slower grass. It's still grass. It still was conditions that favor Taylor Fritz. I didn't think he played a good match that day at all in the quarters after beating Zverev. And that's when I began to think, well, he's just never going to change for Taylor. But it did. Because he goes to the U.S. Open and he makes his way into the finals. And that was a really gritty win that he had over Tiafoe, who was determined that night. And they went to a 5th. And obviously Tiafoe didn't have a lot left physically in the 5th, whatever was going on. But Taylor played a great match and bided his time and kind of waited for the storm to blow out a bit. You could say whatever you want, but he had a great tournament there. And then he goes to the year-end championships and he's playing Sinner again in the finals there. Nobody would have thought that he's going to be in those 2 finals. Now, granted, Sinner outclassed him both times. Sinner outclassed him in the round robin in Turin also. Carlos beat him pretty solidly in the Laver Cup. Novak again got him in Shanghai, despite as well as Taylor played. Novak still beat him in straight. So I feel like the best of the breed is still too good for him. But boy, it's not many guys right now. And I feel like Fritz earned that number 4 ranking, which he only got by virtue of getting to that final in Turin to move past Medvedev and take away number 4. So I might say him. Do you have another guy you would mention other than Fritz?
I mean, there's a few. I think Draper had a really good breakthrough year.
He did. Draper was terrific. I love the way Draper, particularly like the way he played at the Open, and watching him play Sinner at the Open and from the press seats at the Open. There's one press section that's lower down, and you get a great view of that lefty serve from down in those seats. And the work that he had on that serve going into the ad court, he was driving Sinner nuts because Sinner knew he was going to go wide to the backhand and maybe occasionally into the body, but he couldn't do anything about it. It reminds me of what Billie Jean used to say about Margaret Court, that she knew every move she was going to make. She could anticipate everything, but she couldn't stop it. She was talking about that after one match, and I kind of felt that was that way for Sinner for a while against Draper at the Open, who also played a great match against De Minaur. So, yeah, I'm very encouraged about him, and he's a very fierce competitor in his way. And, I certainly expect him, but I'm expecting him to make another leap next year. This was great to get to the Open semi, but now I'm saying, okay, don't stop there. You should be making a habit of this and maybe thinking about getting to a Wimbledon final as an example. He's good enough to do it. And yeah, he might be my number 2 candidate behind Fritz if you talk about that improved award.
Yeah, 100%. And if I was to press you for your Grand Slam picks for 2025 for the men's side, who would you pick?
Oh yeah, we've discussed the women. I'm saying my logical call now. I still say that Djokovic, assuming that the knee does not hinder him, because I'm still a bit concerned by him wearing that sleeve, and he still needed the sleeve on the knee in Shanghai. And it's not that he isn't moving well, but I just feel like having to wear that tells me that he's still concerned about it. He's trying to protect it, whatever the case. He won the Olympics with that sleeve, so be it. I'm saying he gets number 25, and that the other 3 are divided between Carlos and Sinner again. And I'm giving Sinner 2 and Carlos 1. Assuming that he doesn't get suspended and that everything's okay, and I've got my fingers crossed on that. But so be, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But if he's out there suspended, and I like Sinner for 2, Carlos for 1, Novak for 1.
Okay. And which one do you think Novak takes?
I'm giving Novak Wimbledon.
Wimbledon, okay.
Yeah.
Carlos Roland Garros, or
Australia's going to. I won't be shocked if he gets Australia, but I think if I had to choose between the two, I'm going to say Wimbledon right now. But as I say, I think he's going to make quite a go of it in Melbourne. And then the other two guys, I think they'll, instead of dividing 4 this time, they get 3 between them. That's how I'm looking at it. What do you think?
it's really tough. It's really, really tough. Part of me thinks, could someone like Zverev finally make the leap, and maybe if Novak's not 100% and Carlos and Yannick, who knows, maybe Yannick gets banned and Carlos is injured and he's not looking his best, maybe he could win it. But yeah, I mean, Novak, if he's 100%, I think he does win a slam. I actually have a weird feeling that Roland Garros, he could potentially win that. And the reason I say that is because in the last few years, I almost feel like he is being the best clay courter on the men's side. And like we saw Carlos struggle with him this year, even at the Olympics, and last year he lost to Roland Garros. Sinner's not the most comfortable on the clay. He's a very good clay courter, but he's more comfortable on hard court. I think it's fair to say he's better on grass as well, generally. So I could actually see him winning that. And then Yannick, I think, it's going to be tough to beat him at the Australian Open, US Open. I think it's really tough. I don't see Carlos beating him in Australia. I think the conditions are just too suited to Yannick, despite obviously Yannick losing to Carlos.
Well, I think Carlos is, yeah, I agree with that.
But
I think Carlos I wish he wasn't playing these exhibitions. I'm happy for the people running the exhibitions because he's such a great ambassador for the game, and he'll be cooperative with them and the fan. He's not going to cheat the fans. They're going to see great tennis from him, but this should be a time when he's sort of gearing up and practicing and maybe resting his brain and his body a bit instead of dealing with these exos. And so, but good point about Djokovic. Look what he's done. The proof of the pudding and what you're saying is let's go back. He had won it in 16 finally, and then 21 he gets it again. He loses to Rafa in 22, and then he wins it again in 23, and he didn't lose this past year at Roland Garros. He had a default in the quarters. That's what's so great about him is that you can make a case for why he should win any of those 4. That's why I think he's somehow got to get one of them, is that we think of him through the years as the best hardcourt player. Now it's debatable because of Sinner, but boy, he's still a fantastic hardcourt player. He's become better and better on the grass, which is why he never seems to miss the finals of Wimbledon anymore. And so he's just such a consummate all-surface player. You could make the case for why he should win any of those. But I just got to believe that along the line there, whether it's Melbourne, whether it's Wimbledon, Roland Garros, and then the Open, he's had a lot of bad luck. You think about as great as he's been on hard courts and the 10 finals, and he's only won that tournament 4 times only. But as great as he is on hard, we would think maybe he should have won it 6 or 7. So I feel like that's how he's looking at it too. I suspect that, look, I'm going to go after everything next year. I'm not going to burden myself and put a lot of unnecessary pressure that it has to be Australia. I'm going to try hard. If I can get it done, I'm getting it done. But he's got to feel like he stays healthy. He's going to give himself 4 very good cracks at it.
Yeah, agreed. Which slam do you think Carlos takes? Because you're saying he only takes 1 as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it wouldn't shock me at Wimbledon because he's won the last 2 years, but I'm thinking maybe Carlos, maybe it's the US with him. Maybe he comes back and wins the Open, gets his second Open.
Okay, and so Yannick wins Roland Garros, which would be big for him because he'd win a non-hardcourt slam, to be fair.
Obviously, that's I know. I don't think it's his best surface, but I think he's capable. I think had Sinner been able to finish off Carlos, I would have liked his chances against Zverev in the final.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's definitely not out of the realms of possibility. I think all 3 players are just such great all-rounders when it comes to surfaces. So it's just
they're playing essentially the same way in every court. The game these days there's not as big a difference. There are adjustments that have to be made, but yeah, all three of them are capable on any of the surfaces. But I think it's a good point you're making on Novak, and I think he knows that too. And the thing that Novak loves about Roland Garros now is that there's no more Rafa. And therefore, you know, that was always the worry in the back of his mind. Everybody else's too, except that he would go into the tournament like 2 years ago. In 2022, he actually played 4 pretty darn good matches before he played Rafa. He was really playing well. And then he got kind of tight against Rafa, and had a chance in the 4th set. Should have gotten it into a 5th set, and he couldn't get there and lost it in a 4th set tiebreak. But that was probably the only guy that was going to beat him that year. Was Rafa. So I feel like now he does go in there thinking kind of the way you do. I'm as comfortable, maybe more comfortable on this stuff than the other guys. And even though Carlos grew up on clay, you know, I've dealt with him here, and he saw that Carlos, of course, had collapsed against him with the cramps at the French Open 23, and then now he beats him head on in 2 tiebreaks in the Olympics this year. So yeah, he can come up with a good case for any of those in terms of how he looks at it and what he believes he can accomplish. And look, I think the men's, it's interesting. We talked about all the women, and there are more women. There's potential maybe for more surprises among the women next year than there are among the men. That's what it comes down to, because I still think we're looking at this elite cast of Alcaraz, Sinner, Djokovic, you know, and I don't have faith in Zverev. I have this faith that he goes far and that we're going to see him deep into a lot of the majors, but somehow, I don't know, I think Roland Garros was indicative of it. And then, of course, he's got this issue with Fritz, and he keeps losing to Fritz as he did at Wimbledon and the Open. And so there, again, you mentioned Medvedev at the start. There are guys that can do that to Zverev too. So I don't necessarily trust him. And we talked about Medvedev, and I don't think Fritz is winning majors. And so you go on down the list and you look at people like Draper, and Draper might be the one of the few guys that could spring a big surprise. But I still think we're looking at that elite group. They're the ones that will control the climate at the majors.
Yeah, there's definitely a gap. There's quite a sizable gap, I think, between those 3 and the rest. I don't think there's the same on the women's tour as you're saying, which is interesting. Who knows? I mean, maybe someone will surprise us on the men's side and really break through, and they might need a slice of luck potentially as well. You know, someone goes out early in their half of the draw.
Yeah.
And you know, who knows? I guess with the rankings at the moment, you could, for example, you could be in Zverev's half. Zverev could lose early. Yannick and Carlos could play each other in a semi and then tire each other out. Maybe get a tied Yannick or Carlos in the final or something.
Yeah, I have to say, you touched on something important there. I'm really sorry that. I mean, look, Zverev earned the number 2 ranking in the sense of he kept his level up. He won so many. It was all the match wins. It was the consistency, the depth of his record. I'm not saying he didn't earn it, but I was kind of hoping that Carlos would end the year too, because you'd rather see those guys being seeded 1 and 2 and then see where Novak ends up on which half. But you don't want to see Carlos and Sinner playing semis anymore. Those days should be over. So in that sense, it was too bad. I'm sure Carlos was kind of hoping he could pull it off at the end there too, because I think he'd rather that it was that way. I mean, it's just more special. It's more fitting and befitting of them that they would play in the final.
Yeah, because they haven't played a Grand Slam final yet. I think we discussed this before. And it surely has to be about time coming in 2025. But it would be strange to see Novak, Carlos, and Yannick all in the same half, which could happen. But yeah, I agree. I mean, it's weird to see Carlos below, Sasha when he's won 2 out of the 4 slams and Zverev hasn't won a slam this year. So as you said, it's just the way the ranking system works, but it just doesn't. I think everyone knows that he's not the second best player in the world, right?
And Zverev, to his credit, made some comments during Turin that he doesn't really disagree with us. He really doesn't. He knows. I mean, if you said to him, Sasha, would you take 15, 17 less match wins to have and get Roland Garros back and have it be your victory instead of Carlos's? He'd say yes. He knows it's the majors, and and not to diminish any of the 1000s or Turin or anything like that, but I feel like he kind of knew, and he was discussing it, and he knows that those two guys divided the slams, and it was just that was some inconsistency from Carlos, and some of it was circumstantial because the whole thing with the Olympics is that it messed him up and Novak because they put the effort into it. And then emotionally, you're drained after that. And it was understandable why Carlos would then lose the Monfils match and have that shock loss at the Open. And he just wasn't. It threw him off because, again, shifting surfaces and going from grass to clay back to hard was too much. So he didn't perform as consistently as he should have. And if he had, he could have been a solid 2. He could have been a solid 2 under different circumstances, but so be it. I think he'll get that, hopefully with some consistency the first half of 2025, that maybe by Wimbledon, then we'll see. I would hope by Wimbledon they would be seeded 1-2.
Yeah, it'd be good to see him make a semi-final of the Australian Open because I don't think he's made one yet. So
yeah, I know, hard to understand. Zverev just outplayed him, but he didn't play a good match against Zverev, and Zverev was terrific that day. But yeah, it's time. Yeah, start with the semi and go from there.
Exactly. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time. I know we've overrun a little bit, so I appreciate you being on as always. Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, that was great. I think it was pretty comprehensive. I think we covered it all, and thanks for having me on, and I look forward to doing another one of these soon.
Of course, yes. Of course, we'll definitely catch up soon. And if I don't see you before the Christmas period or New Year, well, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and your family. And we'll definitely catch up in the new year. Enjoy the off season, and the season starts so quickly, so it'll be a short break. But we love tennis, so I'm sure we'll be aching for its comeback.
Well, thank you, Faizan. I had a good time.
Thanks so much.